and welcome to Talking Blue. My name is Nick. I'll be your host. This is my very own podcast where we're going to talk everything Dodgers. We're going to talk everything baseball. If you're a big Dodger fan like me, this is the place for you. You're going to have game reactions. We're going to talk about players, player breakdown. We're going to talk about numbers. We're going to do a deep dive into numbers. Everything about the Dodgers that's going on around them. We're going to talk about them on this podcast. You can get this podcast on Apple Podcast, on Spotify. You can watch it on YouTube. You can follow us at talkingbluepod on TikTok, on Instagram, on X. And it's super exciting. I'm so excited to do this. And let's get into the first episode. So, here on episode 1, we're going to talk about the offseason that just happened. We're going to talk about some spring training talking points, some of the things that have happened throughout spring so far. And then we're going to talk about the Tokyo series and everything that's about to go on. So far, the Dodgers have played 2 exhibition games, and we're going to get into all of that. So, really quickly, the Dodgers offseason. So, last year going into 2024, the Dodgers had an incredible offseason. Obviously, they brought in Shohei, they brought in Yamamoto, they brought in other pieces. Really, the offseason was just centered around Yamamoto and Ohtani, and those 2 players alone give you an incredible offseason. And then when you consider the other pieces that they brought in, this offseason that just passed was even better. They brought in Tanner Scott. They brought in Blake Snell, Roki Sasaki, Hyun-Sung Kim. They brought in Kirby Yates. They brought back Blake Trinan, Teoscar Hernandez. It was an incredible offseason. They spread around the money even more. Last year, obviously, it was built around those 2 guys mainly. And it's really incredible that they were able to add all those pieces to what was already a great team, obviously. And what's going to be super interesting going into the season, and we'll get into this more, is how do all the pieces fit in? The rotation is loaded. The bullpen, when fully healthy, is incredible, even with some of the injuries that they have right now. And that's what's going to be so interesting to see. We've seen it, a little bit of it throughout spring so far, but how does it all work throughout the regular season? And we'll get into this in future podcasts. How does the season play out, and with all this talent, how does it all work? And so that's going to take us into what we've seen in spring training so far. So we're going to talk a lot about the pitching. And I brought up Roki Sasaki earlier, and that was the most sought after or more interesting thing to see going into spring training, is what does Sasaki look like? You know, when Sasaki went through his free agency, he talked a lot about how he wanted to go to a team that could make him better. He's only 21 years old, pitched a lot so far in his young professional life, but he's seen a little bit of decrease in his velocity over the last couple years. People remember him during the WBC. His average fastball was basically around 100 miles an hour. The last couple of years, it's been more around 96, 97. And he wanted to know why that was happening. And that was really one of the more interesting things to see going into spring. And so his first couple outings, he's only made 2 appearances so far in spring. He's only pitched in 7 innings, but he's looked as advertised so far. I mean, his first outing against the Reds, his fastball was sitting 98. I was a little surprised to see the velo up that much, and so far the splitter is just incredible, honestly. I mean, it's got some numbers that we haven't seen a lot of splitters like that. The spin rate is so low, and it has such a nasty tumbling effect. It's really interesting because it's not even that similar to the splitter that Yamamoto throws. So he's been super interesting, and I'm so excited to see what he looks like during the regular season. Another one of the spring training narratives or things to look at has been Dustin May. Dave Roberts came out and said that he'll be a part of the rotation. He's going to be the fifth. He's going to be slotted into the fifth spot. He's been so hard to evaluate, or it's been really hard to see what's going on with him because he's been injured for so long. And he's been a guy who's relied on so much velocity and stuff, and nobody really knew what was he going to look like this spring. How was his velocity going to look? How is he going to hold up? And the velocity definitely ticked down a little bit in the spring. He's more averaging around 94, 95. But one thing he hasn't lost is that incredible breaking ball. And he's mixed in the four-seamer more, and he looked really good in spring. Some of the numbers weren't great, but really for a guy like that, he's been injured so long, you just want to see what does the velo look like, how does he feel, and he definitely deserved that fifth spot. And there was a lot of people in contention for that, but there's no doubt in my mind that he deserved it, and I think they made the right choice giving him that fifth spot. So one of the other new players like Sasaki, Haesung Kim, really interesting player coming over from the KBO. He signed a 3-year deal. A guy who came over as an infielder, second baseman mainly, can play shortstop. Had never really been viewed as an offensive player. He's always been a defensive player, really good defense, can run. He seems to have good plate discipline to me. It was really interesting what they were going to do with him. Most people slotted him in naturally as the second baseman once Gavin Lux was traded. But the Dodgers optioned him to AAA. He won't start the year with the Dodgers. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I think he looks like a super athletic player, and I think in a loaded lineup, you can have him hit at the bottom of the order and maybe platoon against just right-handed pitchers, not face lefties, and give him a shot to see what he can do. I know he's made a ton of swing changes already. You could already see his whole stance and approach looks different. If it was me, I would have let him start the year with the Dodgers to see what he can do. He seems like such a Dodger player that they'll make him really versatile. He's already seen time in center. He could probably spell Mookie at short when he needs a day off. And being left-handed, he would give a lot of chances against right-handed pitching, but then you wouldn't have to play him necessarily against lefties or some really tough lefties. But they decided to option him. Obviously, they know better than me. He's clearly going through a lot of tough swing changes so far, and it's probably a good idea to let him start out in AAA, see what he does, see how he can change his mechanics and his approach, and then what happens in the regular season? When can he get called up, if at all? So he's a really interesting player, a 3-year deal. I didn't really think he would start in the minor leagues, but he's going to start there. So, Tommy Edman so far, who of course the Dodgers acquired last year, NLCS MVP. He was slated to be the Dodgers center fielder. It looks like he's going to get a lot of run at second. He leads all of spring training for the Dodgers in at bats. He's played mainly at second base, and he's looked really good in spring. So I can see why the Dodgers are thinking, let's have him just play second. Well, they'll probably have Andy Paez in center, maybe James Outman. But Tommy Edman has a 909 OPS this spring, and he's looked great. He's got 3 home runs. So I can see what they're doing with Kim, and I understand that. So we're going to talk about really quickly 2 pitchers that so far this spring, it looks like their stuff has improved a little bit, which is interesting. Yoshinobu Yamamoto, who's obviously the Dodgers' ace, maybe you want to say co-ace. They have so many star pitchers right now. But then another guy is Ben Kasparius, who was called up in spring last year. He looked really good. Kind of a minor in the minor leagues. He's pitched out of the rotation and he's been a reliever. The Dodgers kind of used him as a long man, but then down the stretch and into the postseason, he became a legitimate pitcher that they trusted and that they used in somewhat big moments. He definitely wasn't a high leverage guy, but he opened a lot of eyes. And this spring, it looks like he's gotten even better. His velocity has ticked up a little bit. Some of the spin rates on his breaking balls, like his slider. He also has a cutter. He looks really good, and he looks like a guy who could go from. It's going to be hard in this loaded rotation or bullpen, but him as a long man option looks pretty crazy considering the stuff he possesses. And I'm sure at some point he'll get legitimate innings as someone they could trust in later innings. So him and Yamamoto look really interesting. Yamamoto's four-seamers ticked up a little bit. Kind of interesting coming off of the season he had last year where he looked really good and into the postseason. And he obviously had the injury last year. And it's a really interesting balance to see, is he built up? Does he have to build up to that innings limit? I believe he only threw 80 innings. Or is he fresh off that injury? He didn't pitch a lot of innings last year. And now is he, he's a 26-year-old kid, and is he ready to take that next step? I believe he's going to be the Dodgers ace. The fact that he pitched to a 3 ERA last year and looked really dominant at times, and now his stuff is ticking up. I think that's really scary. I think out of all the potential aces the Dodgers have, Snell, Glass now, Ohtani will come back at some point. I think he's going to be the Dodgers ace, and I think the Dodgers believe that too. Obviously, they're going to let the season play out and kind of see who is the best pitcher, who is their best option going into October. Maybe they have some kind of co-ace, him and Snell, but he looks like he's going to be dominant this year. He might be ready to take that next step, where there's always been no doubt in my mind that he will be a Cy Young kind of pitcher. He might be ready to take that step now. He's not even close to being 30 years old, and it's really interesting to see his stuff already ticking up like that. So the last guy we're going to talk about for the spring training talking points is Tyler Glasnow. He, really interesting, obviously had the injury last year. He was really dominant before then. As soon as he reached his innings, the amount of innings he had thrown in his career, the max, he got injured, and it was an elbow injury. And coming into this season, he didn't have any kind of surgery. He basically just rehabbed it and rested it and made a couple of changes to his mechanics. It looks like he's talked about trying to get more athletic. Obviously, it's difficult considering he's 6'7", 6'8", and he's had a ton of injury history throughout his career. But there's no question when he's on the mound, he's one of the 10 best pitchers in the sport, and he's looked really good in spring. I was really curious to see how does his velocity look. He's been basically sitting 96, which is what he was at last year, touching 98. I just watched him last night pitch in the Tokyo game. He came out of the bullpen. He was getting up to 98. I think that's really interesting. When he had an elbow injury last year, it kind of left the ultimate concern as to where his health is at. Does he need some kind of surgery? And he said that he doesn't need anything like that. He just needs to switch up his mechanics like he's done. And if he's healthy, everyone knows he's primed for a huge year. He's just such a huge question mark. Where is he at? But so far in spring, all the Dodgers starters have been healthy. And that's what you want to see, because the last couple of years the Dodgers have had some crazy health pitching injuries. It seems like whenever they have a guy they can rely on, he's gone down. And that's going to be the biggest question all year is, can this rotation stay healthy? And what does it look like? They have a bunch of guys who have had injury concerns. Obviously, Shohei hasn't pitched since 2023. Blake Snell can tend to be he's always been a second half pitcher. Maybe he struggles in the first half or is nicked up and then dominates down the stretch. Yamamoto came over from Japan and got injured. And even Roki Sasaki has had some minor injuries in his career in Japan. Like I said earlier, the velocity had dipped down at times. So far, really the only two pitchers in spring that have been injured are Evan Phillips and Michael Kopech, and it really just seems like both of those guys are just a little bit behind in their build-up in spring. And I would assume those guys join the team at some point in April and May. So that's really all the talking points for spring training. And now we're going to go ahead and talk about the Tokyo series. Okay, so now we're going to get started with a little bit of a preview or just some narratives about this Tokyo series that's about to begin. Obviously, it's the season opener. Baseball's starting. It's really exciting times. Just like last year, it's funny how the Dodgers are starting overseas. Last year, they started in Seoul against the Padres. Now it's the Cubs and Dodgers in Japan. Obviously, you see why Major League Baseball did this, because there's a bunch of Japanese players between the two teams. Yamamoto will be starting for the Dodgers on Tuesday at 6 a.m. or 3 a.m., wherever you are. Sasaki's going to pitch Game 2. I just think it's incredible that that's how it played out. You know, Sasaki's going to make his Major League debut, but overseas in Japan, where he's from. I just think that's so incredible, and it's going to be so interesting. Obviously, Yamamoto will be going up against Shota Iminaga, just Japanese players all over the place. And then, of course, the biggest star of them all is Ohtani. Little unfortunate that he's not ready to pitch yet. That would be incredible if he could start the season opener on the mound. But the Dodgers are doing the right thing. Their two young Japanese players are going to start the first two games. I'm sure the ratings are going to be crazy, even though here in America, people are going to be watching at 6 a.m. or 3 a.m. But it's going to be so excited. I can't wait to watch. It will be really interesting to see the Dodgers lineup. Right now, it looks like it's going to go Shohei, Mookie, Freddie, Teoscar, Muncy, Will Smith, Michael Conforto, Tommy Edman at second. I would imagine Andy Pages is in center field. I can't imagine Outman starting over him. Maybe they have some kind of platoon, but you can kind of read the tea leaves. James Outman, who has always been a better defensive center fielder than Andy Pages really is better in right field. But in all the games that they've been in together, Pages is in center, and then James Outman is in a corner spot. That kind of shows me that they want Pages to get more used to playing center field, because that's where he's going to go right now. Obviously, with Kim in the minors, that pushes Tommy Edman from center to second, and you're going to have Conforto in left, Teoscar in right. I would imagine they want Pages to get as many reps as possible in center field. He's got a good arm, a great arm, and he's really athletic, but some of the times he doesn't look super comfortable in center field. His routes aren't great, but I think he has all the makings to be a really good center fielder. He's not as quick as Tommy Edman, but he's an athletic and young enough guy to be a good center fielder, and he has all the potential in the world with the bat. I mean, when he barrels the ball up, he hits it as hard as anybody. He pulls the ball in the air really well. He hits fastballs well. He's just struggled against right-handed pitching in his career. He crushes left-handed pitching. So I would imagine he's in their opening day against Iminaga. Like I said, they could switch something up. Maybe Chris Taylor's out there. Kike Hernandez, who's played a lot the last couple of years at third base, is still a really good center fielder, so they could have him out there. But I would imagine that it's Pages out there. One other thing I wanted to talk about regarding the series in Japan is the reports about Mookie Betts. They're saying right now he has an illness. Dave Roberts came out and said that. That's why he didn't participate in the 2 exhibition games. If you were curious as to why. The reporters were asking Dave Roberts. It sounds like, from what he was saying, that Mookie probably won't play. They're saying that he is sick with the illness and that they're not sure if they want to put him out there because he's in face live pitching and they don't want to risk anything. So usually when a manager comes out and says stuff like that, it probably means he won't play. It's not impossible. There's a chance he will. I just think that's a little bit of an interesting narrative. If it's not Mookie, I would imagine Miguel Rojas is playing short, which I could see with Imanaga on the mound for Game 1. Miguel Rojas hits lefties well. So does Mookie Betts, of course. But, I just thought that's one of the interesting things, that Mookie Betts might not be in the lineup. So I can't wait. It's exciting times here on Talkin' Blue. It's exciting times to watch the Dodgers finally play in a couple days. Opening day, the real opening day, is just a few days away. It's so exciting. That's going to wrap it up here on the first podcast on Talkin' Blue. Thanks for everyone for joining. Like I said, you can get this podcast on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. You can watch on YouTube. Follow us at Talkin' Blue at talkingbluepod on all social media. And we'll be back in a couple days to review the 2 games in Tokyo. Bye, guys.